Just what the heck is going on inside of WB Discovery? How is it that a multi-billion-dollar company can do so many things wrong in so many different industries? From the cancellation of allegedly completed movies, to the delisting of games within 60 days, to shutting down beloved subsidiaries, it's hard to know what's going through WB Discovery's head. But first, we have to talk about what WB owns. For starters, WB owns the entirety of DC Comics, everything from movies to animations to video games as well. WB also owns Harry Potter, or rather the Wizarding World as they call it. J.K. Rowling still owns the rights to publish the books as well as stage plays. WB also owns the entirety of Cartoon Network, which also includes Adult Swim, which of course means Adult Swim originals like The Boondocks, Robot Chicken, most infamously though Rick and Morty, and even original anime productions like Ninja Kamui and the upcoming Lazarus anime. Warner Bros. Also owns HBO, best known for Game of Thrones before Season 8. It's amazing how they dropped the ball on Season 8, but honestly, I'm not going to focus on that because that's not the focus of this video. They also own Rooster Teeth, which includes Red vs. Blue and Ruby. Well, they owned Rooster Teeth. More on this later. They also own the Looney Tunes, and Tom and Jerry, and Mortal Kombat. There's a number of things they own. Oh, and they also own It as well, in case anyone cares about that. So, all in all, WB owns a lot of stuff. And at certain points in time, WB franchises were on top of everything. Well, Game of Thrones more specifically. But now WB Discovery is seemingly losing a ton of money. Well, not even seemingly, they are losing a ton of money. And as such, they have to shed some of the weight. They have to close down, cancel projects, shut down studios, and double down on really crappy games. Speaking of games, let's talk about WB's strategy for video games and why that's so messed up. Warner Bros. Also publishes video games, and at times WB can make games that are really popular and games that people really like the Batman Arkham series, or even something like Hogwarts Legacy, which was the highest selling video game of last year, beating out any Call of Duty or Rockstar title, which is a rarity. So if a game like Hogwarts Legacy did so well, a single player fully fleshed out game with no microtransactions, and not a live service game can do so well, why are they doubling down on doing the exact opposite? Making multiplayer focused live service games that are filled to the brim with microtransactions and are not fully fleshed out. At least not at launch. You know, the Suicide Squad. They also tried to do this with Back 4 Blood, and they're doing this again with Multiverses. More on Multiverses later, but for now, let's focus on the Suicide Squad, a game that did so poorly that they had to discount it 40% off 1 month after its release. The game was developed by the venerable Rocksteady Studios, but the core game as a whole sucks. Yes, I get it, a lot of people think that this game failed because of Sweet Baby Inc. or whatever, but they're really not the boogeyman. The main reason why this game failed was because it was boring and filled to the brim with microtransactions. Like basically 99% of the problem was with Rocksteady or the higher ups at WB forcing Rocksteady to make this game profitable. There was also Back 4 Blood. Back 4 Blood was unfortunately unsuccessful. It's kind of like Left 4 Dead, but you have to build into loadouts and all that stuff, and a lot of people just wanted to kill zombies. Left 4 Dead also has the benefit of just being pick up and play. You don't have to invest into builds, you don't have to grind to get certain cards so that you can make your character better and stuff like that. It's also quite moddable as well, all things that Back 4 Blood wasn't. And of course, we can't forget about Multiverses. You know, Multiverses was actually pretty fun, and I thought it was pretty successful, but they took the game down and they're relaunching the game sometime this year. According to their trailer, they went through the effort of rebuilding the netcode and rebuilding the entire game in Unreal Engine 5. I think the game will be fairly successful, but I think WB needs to pull from more characters from more of their franchises. Like imagine if they added Neo from The Matrix, or Harry Potter from Harry Potter, or Samurai Jack, or Mordecai and Rigby from the regular show. I think that'd make for a pretty good roster, so long as it isn't too difficult to unlock new characters. For free, I mean. So it seems like their live service strategy isn't doing so hot, except for maybe Multiverses. But there's no guarantee that Multiverses will even do well, unfortunately. So now let's talk about their other interesting strategy for video games: delisting every Adult Swim published game on Steam. Adult Swim publishes a lot of games on Steam. a lot of games that aren't even really related to their own franchises. Aside from a Rick and Morty VR title and a Samurai Jack game, every single Adult Swim title is some sort of indie game that's just published by them. They're not on sale right now during the ongoing Steam sale, and by the time the Steam summer sale rolls around, if their information is true, then they'll be delisted by the summer sale. Meaning if you want these games, you'll have to buy them now at full price, and it'll be quite expensive. Otherwise, you'll need to turn to piracy, which is sad. Piracy isn't a question, but rather an answer to this specific question. What do we do when games can no longer legally be bought? And the only answer is piracy, unfortunately. I really don't like to prop up piracy, especially when there's an alternative method, a more, I guess, ethical method, so to speak. But in cases like this where Adult Swim removes the titles and you want to play these titles and you can't play these titles, and if piracy becomes the only way you can access these games, then it becomes a moral imperative. Nothing sucks more than not being able to give developers what they deserve. What's worse is that some of these developers explicitly requested WB transfer the rights to their own game to them so that they can self-publish, so that they can keep the games up, only for WB to decline the transfer request, despite the transfer request being supposedly like 2 or 3 clicks. If Adult Swim doesn't want to maintain these games, then they really should just give the games back to the original developers. I mean, legally they don't have to, but it's a moral obligation of theirs. So their two-pronged strategy for video games is interesting. A, make more live service games, and B, delist all of their completed, already available, already for sale indie titles. I can't see how WB plans on playing this one because live service games are expensive as crap to make. But hey, WB's gotta do this for all of those sweet, sweet tax breaks, am I right, fellas? But on the topic of WB doing things to completed products, let's talk about their canceled movies. At the heart of this movie cancellation fiasco, we have 2 different movies. The first of which is Batgirl, an unreleased movie centered around Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl. This would have been set in the DCEU, presumably after the disastrous Flash movie, because this features Michael Keaton as Batman. Without seeing the movie, it's hard to know whether or not this completed movie would have failed at the box office. But I think it's completely ridiculous that they can just cancel a completed movie and then use that as a tax write-off. Like, I don't understand how this can even happen, and someone at WB should just leak the movie. Leak the movie before they destroy it forever. I don't know if I would have seen it if it ever came out to theaters, but what I do know is that now that it's basically a completed canceled movie, I have to see the movie if it ever gets leaked. On the topic of canceled movies, let's also talk about Coyote versus Acme. For those of you that have seen the Looney Tunes, you know how Coyote tries to get the Roadrunner and always fails because his Acme inventions always fails. Now imagine a movie where Coyote sues Acme for their faulty products. That sounds like a great movie. That's the kind of stuff I want to see. It's a mixture of animation and live action, kind of like what Space Jam is. Like, imagine Space Jam, but instead of basketball, it's Law and Order with Looney Tunes. I think a lot of people would have wanted to see this movie just for its ridiculous premise. I know I would have. Again, it's impossible to know whether or not this would have been a success in the box office, but I also maintain that it's stupid that they can just make a movie and then cancel it and then use that as a tax write-off. Someone really should leak this movie. I would watch it. So yes, there we talked about their movie strategy as well, but I think it's time we also talk about what they've done with Rooster Teeth. Rooster Teeth didn't start life out as a subsidiary of WB, but they ended up being bought by WB sometime in, actually, I don't even know when. Let me look it up. Okay, it's a super long process that didn't actually culminate in WB directly buying Rooster Teeth, but a number of smaller acquisitions that piled up. But for anyone that was watching YouTube when it was first made, Rooster Teeth was one of the first to emerge with their hit Halo Machinima, Red vs. Blue. The rest is history. They made a bunch of different YouTube channels, and then they ended up making their own original series with Monty best known as Ruby. I'm not gonna lie to you, the most I've watched of Ruby was the 4 original trailers and then like the first episode of Ruby. Let me tell you right now, the trailers were so awesome, and then I just watched the series and I decided, no, I don't want to watch it. I don't know why, but yeah, whatever, I guess. But it is unfortunate that Rooster Teeth is now being shut down by WB, which means what's gonna happen to all of their YouTube channels, like Achievement Hunter or Death Battle? Yes, okay, Death Battle is contentious, especially among among certain fan bases, but still, it's still a very popular series. Heck, RWBY is actually really popular too. They even got an actual anime series, like in the form of RWBY Ice Queendom. Anyways, Rooster Teeth shutting down sucks, and it's probably a tax write-off strategy, let's be honest. They also did try to sell Rooster Teeth, but no one bought, so they're shutting it down. Apparently, this division was unprofitable. And yes, compared to the traditional way of making media, making internet videos for a living isn't nearly as profitable as one might think, especially with longer and longer productions, with better visuals and stuff. It's why much bigger channels opt for selling merchandise. Like, you know, Logan Paul sells Prime. Yeah, it's a drink, but it's also influencer merchandise. Or LTTstore.com with their stuff. And even Rooster Teeth sells merch too, but apparently that wasn't profitable enough. But what about RWBY? Isn't that basically anime? And aren't anime fans so degenerate that they'll buy a bunch of merchandise for their favorite anime characters? Like that one guy that turned his entire house into a Sayaka Maizono house? A church, if you will. Like, have you seen this video? You need to watch this video. But aside from extreme cases like him, I would have thought that the RWBY fan base would have bought merchandise of RWBY characters, but I guess I was mistaken, or Rooster Teeth didn't make enough RWBY merch. Whatever the case is, no one knows what's going to happen to all of these individual channels or franchises like Red vs. Blue or even RWBY. Red vs. Blue is an interesting case because while it is in fact a machinima shot in Halo, it's not, in fact, related to Halo whatsoever, but story-wise at least. It's hard to know where this franchise and RWBY will go. As for all of the other subsidiary channels like Death Battle, it's hard to know whether or not they can continue to operate solo. WB could, in theory, give them rights to their channels, but given that WB won't even give indie developers rights to their own games that they developed, it's hard to know whether or not WB will even give these channels to the guys that run it. Now, it's not to say that WB won't release some banger movies and banger video games at some point. Like, Dune 2 is already available, and it's doing pretty well from what I've read. They're also working on a sort of original anime called Suicide Squad Isekai, which is basically what it sounds like. Task Force X in another world. But some of these incredibly baffling decisions is unfortunate, especially in regards to canceling movies, not giving the developers the rights to their own games, and just doubling down on a method of games that most gamers actually hate. And the worst part is that making a live service game isn't just some silver bullet. Like, you know how expensive games are to make? Well, live service games are even more expensive to make. On top of maintaining a server, you also have to make new content for your game on a periodic basis, or risk the game dying. But in theory, you should be able to make up for all of this by having recurrent spenders, people buying constant microtransactions. A successful live service game is essentially a money printer. The big problem, of course, is being a successful live service title. On top of competing with new titles releasing around the same time period, you also have to contend with older, more established live service titles. WB says the AAA market is volatile, but if they're really risk adverse, then I think making a live service title is even riskier than making a normal game, you know? If you like this video, please press the like button and check out our other videos, and if you like those other videos as well, be sure to press the subscribe button and share the good gospel of high-tech lowlife with your friends. Furthermore, we have a community Discord for enlightened individuals such as you. And if you wish to further support high-tech lowlife, be sure to check out our Patreon page. Links in the description.